Yellow Loong is a secret boss in Chapter 4 of Black Myth Wukong. He is the final boss in the Long Quest. So, to reach him, not only do you need to be in Chapter 4, but you also need to have defeated a Red Loong in Chapter 1, Black Loong in Chapter 2, and Cyan Loong in Chapter 3. If you haven't done any of these, and you want to go back, don't worry, I have a video guide, I'll link it up in the card and down below. But if you have defeated all of these, then it's time to go to Yellow Loong's location. You'll need to start by progressing the webbed hollow until you defeat the Buddha's hand. After you do, this monster will crash down and form a bridge that you can cross over, accessing new areas. One of these new areas will lead you to Yellow Loong. So, start from the Cliff of Oblivion Shrine in the webbed hollow. Head down the path and over the bridge created by the Buddha's hand. Jump down and immediately head right until you reach the lower platform. From here, turn left and cross the rickety bridge. Now, after crossing the rickety bridge, you continue through a pretty darn linear area until you reach a webbed path guarded by several hanging sacks. If you just attempt to cross as is, these come alive and knock you off the bridge. You can clear them out using a couple different techniques. Most of them you can just bonk with your heavy attack, assuming you're using either thrust or pillar stance. But there's a couple that are really hard to do, especially since the charged heavy and thrust stance has forward momentum and you might yeet yourself off the cliff. Now, this is where your spells or vessels will come in handy. If you already have the Golden Needle, this is an effective way to clear the one on the right so that you can safely pass by. The one on the left you can actually hit with a heavy thrust, so it's not quite as annoying. Just be really careful to not fall off while doing this. If you don't have a Golden Needle, instead, as you're running by, immobilize it and run past. If you're coming back to this after completing Chapter 4, and you have the power that allows your Immobilize to apply to multiple targets when you cast it on one, then you can pretty much just freeze all of these enemies and run through without too much difficulty. After this, you're presented with a linear area to explore, which you continue through until you encounter the Relief of Fallen Loong Shrine. And this is where things get really tough, because Yellow Loong is a serious encounter. He is one of the most dangerous enemies that I've fought to date, and progressing on him took me an entire day. I don't even know how many attempts it took. It was a lot. This is the sort of fight that really forces you to get good, because a lot of his combos aren't fancy moves that you can negate by just hitting a button. Instead, they're patterns that he uses with increasing complexity as his health gets lower. This makes him very dangerous, hard to deal with, and honestly, a brutally difficult encounter. But it's also why he's really fun. So far, I'd say he's actually my favorite boss fight so far. Because of its difficulty, there's a couple recommendations that I want to make build-wise. First of all, go with whatever stance you're comfortable with. For me, that's thrust stance. I've tried smash stance for mobility's nice, but I often get hit and take damage, which interrupts my charged heavy. I've tried pillar stance. I guess it's okay, but there's a lot of waiting, and certain enemies with jump attacks and stuff can hit you anyway. So overall, I've stuck to thrust stance because I like the reach on a charged heavy, and I find the backstep that's part of its varied combo to be highly effective. In addition, I used red tides with additional investment into might regen. This way, I could not only stagger the boss fairly frequently, but do a significant amount of damage and was up twice for the fight. Golden Needle for additional damage and stagger. Cloud Step turned out to be MVP. I strongly recommend maxing out the duration on it. And last up, the Non-Able Spirit. Non-Able's pretty cool because if you use a light attack, then followed up with Non-Able, you're able to interrupt the boss, staggering him for a very short amount of time and stopping his combos. I did this a lot, especially when he held his weapon vertically, because I noticed his vertical attacks were the most dangerous. Now, I do advise having the Golden Needle for this fight, as it's another good way to inflict some stagger and extra damage on him, and I'm going to be coming out with a guide on how to get it in the near future, so do be sure to get subscribed for that, and if you find this helpful, leave a like, then share it with a friend. But for now, let's get into his moveset. So first up, he will almost always start the fight with a thrusting attack. He thrusts his weapon at you, dashing forwards, then spins his weapon in an arc, dealing damage a second time. If you dodge in the opposite direction of Yellow Loong when you're avoiding the thrust, you should always be clear of the spin, because it seems to primarily be there to punish people who are running in after dodging the initial attack. However, as his health gets low, he will then whirl back towards you and through you with another charge, before executing a leaping strike where he covers a lot of distance. This second leaping strike is particularly challenging to dodge just because it covers so much distance in such a short time. When his health gets even lower, he adds another 2-hit strike combo on the end of this. So after dodging the leaping strike, when his health's in about the 60 to 40% range, this is a good time to punish. Once he starts adding that second strike, this is a bad time to punish. You need to wait for him to attack 2 more times, avoid those, then go in to punish the move. He uses this combo a lot. It's one of his most frequently used sequences, so if you get good at it, this will be a huge advantage on the fight. When he starts another common combo, he holds his weapon either nearly vertically or horizontally before executing 2 whirling slashes with a final follow-up. This attack also has a horizontal version, which works pretty much the same way but covers less distance. And the timing takes a little bit of getting used to, because if you panic dodge when he first starts executing these strikes, you are very likely to be hit by the last portion of the attack, which is the most damaging. In addition, you shouldn't try to dodge this by dodging backwards. It has a lot of mobility, so you're very likely to get clipped. I've noticed that he very often combos this into another attack, where he starts by jumping into the air, then striking down, causing lightning to erupt from his weapon. When he's low health, he repeats the jump a couple times, making it even more dangerous. These have a pretty generous tell though, so as long as you're prepared for it, it shouldn't be too hard to avoid. For the horizontal variant, he instead tends to use a vaulting attack. Now, another move he has, which is really similar to his starting charge, is his short thrust, where he executes a very quick thrust, then slashes his weapon back and forth. I found that this is all so fast that you can use 2 dodges to cover it, especially if you gain some distance. And finally, he ends in a whirling finish, meaning you either have to dodge again, or you need to have dodged backwards to get out of his attack range. But as his health gets lower, he'll turn blue and finish this entire sequence with a vaulting attack. This is one of the 2 times where he turns blue, the other of which mimics his counter-strike move that I'll talk about in just a minute. Then you have his big power-up move, where he charges up, and I know it can be tempting to get damage in when he's charging. Problem is, right after he finishes charging, he explodes and rushes forwards. He will then rush forwards and back and forwards 3 additional times before rising into the air and diving down to slam on top of you. If you cloud step his initial rush, you can actually use the decoy to tank almost this entire sequence. But do be careful, because unless you have full investment and use the timing perfectly, the decoy will actually fade right before he does the dive down. So he'll rise up, it looks like he's going to dive down on the decoy, and then he dives on your head instead, which is really annoying and causes you to take a lot of damage. So personally, just to be safe, I would always recommend manually dodging the dive. As his health gets lower, after he dives down, he's going to jump up into the air and dive down and jump up into the air and dive down for 3 total finishers. Next up is one of his more annoying techniques. Now, he doesn't use it too frequently, but it is extremely damaging. He holds his spear vertically, then punches you with the butt of a spear to do a grab attack. If you fail to avoid it, he goes through an extremely damaging execution sequence. If you notice throughout the footage that whenever he raises his spear vertically, I tended to hit him with non-able just to interrupt him. This is why, because I really didn't want him pulling off this move, as it's almost guaranteed death. Worse yet, it looks very similar to a second combo that I'd like to call the interrupt combo, where he raises his spear then strikes you with the butt of his weapon before whirling it to slam it down. After this, he will sometimes chain this into another attack, where he turns blue, evades you, and then counter-strikes. Now, below around 70% health, he starts using his defensive move to see through your attacks. When he sees through something, that means he completely avoids it by dodging up into the air and turning intargetable. This is really annoying if you're using a charged heavy, because, yeah, he completely negates the damage. So I would recommend, as his health gets lower, trying to focus your charged heavies only after you've already seen him use this recently, as it seems to have a short cooldown. And then the last distinct move that I noticed him using pretty frequently is his explosive slash, where he attacks you striking with a spear, then whirls around, and most importantly the tell here is that he continues the whirl, carving a line of lightning in the air. This lingers for a moment before exploding. Now, I found the easiest way to deal with this was actually getting closer to the boss or rolling through him, because it's very likely that he's going to start a second attack sequence right as this explodes. And if you're at long range, the flash of the explosion is actually going to hide his next move, making it very difficult to avoid. But if you roll through, you can see him moving and positioning his weapon, which at the very least means you can see what he's doing next and hopefully avoid it. Much of a fight consists of learning his patterns. You'll find that he tends to open with his thrust, and after he executes the final hit in the sequence for whatever his health is, that is a very good time to punish him and get in some damage. There's also several points where after he retreats, he'll kind of do a standoff. If you don't move into melee range, he's not going to aggressively attack you. But if you move into melee range, he's going to quickly and aggressively engage and begin using his combos and chaining things together. Most of his basic combos are 2 to 3 hits long, and he tends to use 2 of them back to back. It's very rare for him to use 3 of them back to back, meaning you typically have to plan to avoid 5 to 6 strikes before you can get in some damage. Also, I know it is tempting to just keep building your attack combo and keep hitting him. There are a few cases where this is totally fine, but for the most part, patience is going to be your best friend. It's much more about waiting for him to do something and reacting to his attack to really focus on dodging, because this is a long fight, he has a lot of health, and especially if you get shocked, he does an incredible amount of damage. Having something like the long scale armor or Thunderhorn Soak to reduce his damage is highly recommended. As one last note, this fight doesn't specifically punish you for using a Pluck of Many, but I generally found it wasn't worth using. I'd rather save my mana for things like Immobilize and Cloud Step that simply have better mana efficiency. Because Yellow Loong is very mobile, so he was very likely to just dodge away from my Pluck of Many anyway, which kind of wastes a lot of mana. And especially using non-able, lowering my max mana, it just didn't feel worth it in this case. But like I said at the top, this is a sort of fight where you really have to get comfortable and get good. So use whatever feels best to you. This is just what worked for me. Now, I'm very proud to present my fight against Yellow Loong. This was after over a day of practice, and while I didn't play perfectly, I'm really proud of the end result. I have to say, I really like this fight. It is brutally difficult, but it's the sort of brutal difficulty that also feels very fair. When I messed up, I was like, oh, I know exactly what I did wrong. Well, I guess sometimes the counter-strike versus the grab attack, I wasn't quite sure there, but once I found that I could use non-able to simply interrupt the move whenever he turned his weapon vertical, that seemed to prevent the grab attack most of the time anyway, and it felt like, alright, at the very least, I have a counter for this technique. But for everything else, it really did feel very fair. I didn't feel like I was fighting against the game controls or a weird camera. I felt like I was fighting against my own mistakes, which is exactly what I want from an epic boss fight in a game like this. So if that's it, good luck in your attempts, and after you beat him, you get one of the most fun transformations in the game. After you beat him, you get the Golden Lining transformation. Like all transformation spells, it has a light attack, a heavy attack, and a special interaction. The light attack is honestly nothing too special. The heavy attack does quite a bit of damage, but isn't very easy to use because it's a 3-hit sequence that requires precise timing. However, the special effect is that you have a varied combo, where when you're using the light attack, if you immediately press the heavy attack as an enemy counterattacks you, you interrupt your own combo and you deflect their strike and gain a focus point. This perfect parry system is not only really fun, but it is super powerful, and if you get good at it, you will absolutely trivialize future bosses. That said, I haven't really gotten good at it yet, but hey, I'm still practicing. And so with that said, keep an eye out for the transformation being featured in future videos. I'm curious though, what do you think of his boss fight? Is it too hard? Or because it's super fair, is it just hard enough? Personally, I'm in the just hard enough category, but also I completed DLC for Elden Ring, so who knows, maybe my opinion's a little bit biased. I'm curious about some of your thoughts, leave them down below. Also, if you want to brush up on some of these mechanics or you simply prefer reading to watching, then I'll have a full written guide over on Maxwell GG, which you can use to follow along with this fight. And of course, before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can now make videos just like this one possible. Link to support is down below. And a big thanks to everyone who watched to the end of the video. I'm glad you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next one.